You're listening to Better Live Than Dead.
How's it going, everybody? It is about 10 minutes after 10 on June 29th. I guess we can call this a BLTD Emergencycast because after the day the National Hockey League had today, it's almost as if this needed to happen. And I mean, it came together so quickly that the normal co-host, Brayton Wilson, our buddy, could not make it tonight. So we actually have a friend of the podcast, a good friend of the podcast, Chris Ostrander of Two in the Box. How you doing today, bud?
Not too bad. Just trying to process still. It was a heck of a 35 minutes there in the afternoon, and I just remember thinking that the first trade dropped, and before I had a chance to even process what happened, the second trade dropped, and then Steven Stamkos got locked up. So it was the dominoes fell in quick succession.
Now, before we get too far into this thing, Chris, I do have to promote for you. You can follow Chris on Twitter at 2ITB_Buffalo, 2inthebox.com. Check out the Instigator podcast. I certainly suggest it. It's fantastic. But
Appreciate
let's start
that.
off.
Thank you.
No problem. It's good stuff. I really enjoy it, as I said. First trade of the day, Taylor Hall goes to the Devils for Adam Larson.
Yeah,
And
that was a thing, isn't it?
That's a thing that happened in the world, and we have to accept it. I mean, I'm fine with it. The Oilers can do what they want, but what with that deal? Like, I don't even have a reaction because I can't fathom that it even happened.
Yeah, it was the weird thing for me, and now I admittedly don't watch a ton of the Devils. I tune in from here time to time. I really like Corey Schneider, so I give him his due. But I just remember Adam Larson being the top 10 pick who couldn't get in the lineup. And that was like as recently as I felt like 2 years ago. And then here we are today where he's now a top 4 defenseman being traded for one of the 10 best, if not 5 best, left wingers in the game. That was crazy. It was insane. I did not understand the value there for the Oilers.
And now we saw on Twitter after the deal happened, multiple anonymous GMs coming out saying I would have gave this, and that. There were a couple. I saw one. I can't remember exactly where or who said it, but so I do apologize. But it was something along the lines of I would have given up 2 first-round picks and like a second pairing defenseman for Taylor Hall, and they go out and get Adam Larson. So good on you, Peter Chiarelli.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, the first thought I had, and again, this is coming from someone who is real. I know enough about the Devils to be dangerous to myself, I think. I understand that Larson had a nice little resurgence over the last year and a half from where he was, 2 or 3 years ago. But I never considered him to be a top pairing defenseman and maybe barely a top 4 defenseman. And obviously with the Sabres making the trade they did over the weekend, my first inclination was what needed to be added to Mark Pysyk to get Taylor Hall, and was that something that was explored? That was literally the first thing that popped in my mind. And then 5 minutes later, my mind was jumbled again by yet another trade. But it was very. It's just a weird trade, especially 1-for-1, given the value that Hall brings.
I mean, I'm trying to still again process it because I was at work when all the trades broke, and I was trying to do my job as well as think about what the hell is going on. But with the trade with Edmonton and New Jersey, the only thing I can think of was that Peter Chiarelli found a guy he thought would fit. Sorry, I thought it was raining outside. I had my windows open in my apartment. Peter Chiarelli found a guy that he wanted. I mean, I wouldn't have. There's no way at all I would have given up Taylor Hall for that. Could have got a better deal. But the only thing I can think of was, hey, maybe Adam Larson was a guy they coveted a lot. I mean, Peter Chiarelli came out afterwards and said, I know he's not the sexy pick, but you're already setting yourself up for failure, I guess. But, they've got to get someone else there if they want to contend. I mean, there's no way Adam Larson being a top 2 defenseman is going to bring them to the playoffs.
No, that's the peculiar thing. And maybe he was reaching for the need, because all you've heard all summer is how badly they need a right-handed defenseman, and either thin on the blue line to begin with, and the need to pick up someone for the right side in particular really was driving a lot of the chatter with the Oilers. I'm pretty sure PK Subban had come up at one point. I know Ryan Rishaug tweeted that at some point or another the ask from the Oilers of the Canadian, so the Canadians ask of the Oilers for Subban was something along the lines of Draisaitl, a first-round pick, and another quality player, prospect of some sort, something like a Nurse Clefbaum type thing, which obviously was relatively prohibitive from the Edmonton standpoint, of course, but maybe more on par with what you'd think Taylor Hall was worth. I'm sorry, I'm thinking Ryan Nugent-Hopkins now. But it's just, it kind of boggles the mind there, and of course, the number of quote unquote offers that came out, like you said, afterwards, of course, makes you think, well, maybe Peter Chiarelli should have shopped a little bit harder in terms of what he could have gotten. But yeah, he's now made his bed with Adam Larson in it, and he's going to have to sleep in it. And we'll see how comfortable that bed of 6 defensemen is at this point.
Now we're talking about, you mentioned PK Subban, and there was some talk that wasn't too strong of talk, but there were some talks that at one point in time they may have felt that Subban and Hall were linked together. Either, Subban, it was going to be a Subban for Hall straight up deal, which if that had happened, that deal makes so much sense to me, because obviously Montreal wants to get better offensively and Edmonton wants to get better defensively. So trade 2 of your best players, offense and defense, and just swap teams. But clearly that's too easy. So it almost makes sense too, and it kind of gives some credence to that thought, because less than 5 or 10 minutes after the Larson Hall deal was made, we see PK Subban traded straight up for Shea Weber. Obviously Subban to Nashville, Weber to Montreal, and at that point, just all absolute hell broke loose across the NHL Twitter boards and message boards, and everybody just freaking out, and cats and dogs, and I don't even know how to explain it. It was absolute madness.
It really was, and I feel as if I'm relatively immune to being caught by fake accounts. I follow, most of, if not all of, the primary NHL insiders, your Bob McKenzie, Darren Dragers, etc., Elliot Friedman. So I feel whenever, something comes up like the fake McKenzie account dupes somebody, I'm always like, well, I didn't get caught, because I know who I follow and all that. But when I saw Nick Kypreos tweet, could be something on Subban before the day is done, stay tuned, I kind of thought, oh, this is interesting. Let's see how the next couple of hours go. When he then tweeted minutes later that while I don't remember the exact tweet, but this is a real blockbuster, and it was Subban for Weber straight up. The first thought I had was, am I following the real Nick Kypreos? And that doesn't happen to me very often. I had to double check his account. I had to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind, because, yeah, PK Subban's been talked about in trade circles, but Shea Weber certainly hasn't. And, you're talking about 2 of the game's best defensemen. You might say 2 of the top 10 defensemen in the league, top 15. I don't know. I'd have to write it down before I could definitively say it. But this trade just blew my mind from the names moving. I thought it was a little bit more even than maybe some people are making it out to be, as compared to the Larson Hall trade. But still, to have it come so quickly after that previous trade was made for a heck of an afternoon.
I was actually on TSN on their website, just refreshing every so often, obviously, because I'm not supposed to be on Twitter at work, but I've found ways to keep myself posted through TSN, which is fantastic. And I saw it pop up, and immediately I didn't believe it. I was like, I'm on a fake website. This has to be fake right now. Because those are the kind of trades that people are like that the fake accounts make up. Like that was a legit fake account trade. No doubt about it. I'm sure we've actually seen that trade rumored somewhere by a fake account at some point in time in the past couple of years. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why Montreal wanted to get rid of PK Subban, none of which makes sense. Because obviously, I mean, at this point, to me, outside looking in, obviously as a Buffalo Sabres fan, and just a hockey fan in general, to me, it seems like they're doubling down on Michel Therrien, and I don't see why you would do that because, I mean, not only are you doubling down on Michel Therrien, but you're doubling down on Carey Price, and you're putting more pressure on Carey Price because you just took away his best defender. And now, if Price isn't damn near perfect, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting trade from the Montreal perspective more so than Nashville. I think the Nashville side adds up. It's very obvious. Weber carried a very large cap hit, although it's about even, if not even maybe a little lower than Subban's. He was signed forever, and the returns were beginning to diminish. So from that perspective, I understand Nashville's interest in moving Weber and getting – anytime you get PK Subban in the prime of his career, you're going to do it. So from the Nashville perspective, it's kind of an obvious – they're playing with the stacked deck there. They know what they're going to do. They're going to win the hand. But from Montreal's perspective, it's not as if Shea Weber is playing with one foot. He's still Shea Weber, and he's still going to be a very productive player for them. He scored 20 goals last year, I believe. It's not like his shot's getting softer. So I think looking at it when you say, oh my God, 31-year-old Shea Weber who signed until 25, 26 is really going to be an albatross for the Canadiens. And he will be. In 5 years, he could be a serious issue for Montreal in terms of how they're handling their roster. But he's going to serve a very prominent role for them. He will be a very, very important piece to their puzzle. He's going to get the same minutes Subban got, if not more, because he'll play more of a shutdown role. Because if there's any one detraction against PK Subban, despite what the analytics say about him, is that you may not trust him in a shutdown position. So you do have that side of it, of course. The other thing of it is, and this does apply to both the Canadiens and the Predators, but Weber's cap recapture is beyond prohibitive. And there may be a small chance that he retires with just 1 year left on his deal, but if he does, it's a $25 million cap penalty to the Preds, and the Canadiens are penalized exactly zero. So as Weber gets closer to retirement, and as much as it's going to hurt the Habs when he gets there, it's also going to start to loom large on the conscience of the Predators, because he retires with 1, 2, 3 years left in the deal. You're talking not just about a cap penalty, but a major cap penalty, and a cap penalty at the price of 1, 2, potentially 3 roster players, and prominent ones at that. So that's something to keep an eye on. Obviously, it's about 10 years down the line, but it's another piece of that strange puzzle that we're working with here.
I mean, at this point, it seems to me like Nashville just pulled the trigger on this trade because, I mean, obviously it makes them a better team. It makes them a different team. I feel like it makes them a little bit more dynamic, but they've struggled to get over the hump when it comes to to winning the Stanley Cup. Will this specifically put them over the top? Certainly can give them a different dimension, a different look at things, and maybe they can. Maybe they can figure it out. I mean, they've had a fantastic week. They re-signed Philip Forsberg. They get rid of the contract to Shea Weber, and they get PK Subban. That's not a bad week.
No, and I think I would agree with the way you said it, in that it gives them a different dynamic. It's hard to say exactly what his impact's going to be. He's going to play with Roman Josi. They still have Ryan Ellis and Matthias Ekholm, and their top 4 is phenomenal. And like you said, they re-signed Forsberg. We'll see. They did lose about $1 million in cap space. So I don't know how much maneuvering they can do here, as they look towards the rest of the off season. But I think the way you put it is the best way to say it. It's a different dynamic, it's a different look at it. You wonder, will Subban's offense reappear? And if it reappears, is that the X factor? I think maybe that's probably the biggest question, because he did have a down year scoring wise, at least from the goal scoring category.
I'm just excited to see how it turns out. I mean, it's a little horrifying to have Shea Weber in the division now for the Buffalo Sabres. I mean, it's a nice little relief. It's kind of like earlier, Jonathan Taves tweeted out, hey, Montreal, thanks for taking Shea Weber out of our division, and then someone was like, but you're getting PK Subban. So
right.
It'll be a thing where, it's nice to see Subban out of the division. I mean, he's a fun hockey player. He's a great person off of the ice and on the ice. I mean, I don't have a problem with him, but at least it'll be easier to like PK Subban now. I mean, it's a little more acceptable, but either way. He's out of the division, but now you get Shea Weber. So it's pick your poison essentially at this point in time. But I mean, I'm more intrigued to see what exactly is going on with the Montreal Canadiens, because I'm not sure sometimes they know. And this could be, the straw that breaks the camel's back that sends them down a path of just irrelevancy, or this could be something where it kind of unites the room and they say, we're gonna build around this or whatever. Because obviously, Marc Bergevin said that they wanted kind of a culture change, and I mean I don't know, they kept hinting that PK had some character issues, which whatever you can chalk that up to whatever you want it to be, but I mean at this point in time I just feel like they just didn't like the player that PK Subban was, which again I don't understand, whatever it may be, and they moved on from him. So that's where we're at. Subban's a Predator and Weber is a Canadian, and now we can sit back and wait 5 or 10 years and see who won this trade.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that about Subban, because and this actually kind of came up via Twitter as conversation about both trades was circulating throughout the evening. But it's actually what you're saying about Subban is, they're talking about culture change, things like that, with Subban. And he's a flashy player. He's a bombastic personality. It's not as if he's not good in the community. He gave an entire year's salary to the Children's Hospital in Montreal. So, he's obviously a charitable guy. He cares about those sorts of things. But it was reminiscent of what was being said about Evander Kane when he left Winnipeg. Obviously, since he's come to Buffalo, he's gotten himself in more than enough hot water to potentially justify the concerns that Winnipeg fans and potentially organizational staff had about him. But at the time, it was more or less the question of, A, is this a good player? B, exactly how much of a problem in the locker room is he really? And I thought those questions were being asked of Kane, and then lo and behold, you have a player like Subban who again, he's enjoys dressing himself very well. He's potentially the sharpest dressed guy in the league, right up there with Evander Kane, and that does rub old time hockey folks the wrong way. And it's just a similar point. It's a similar detraction that was made about both players. By all accounts, PK Subban seems to have a sterling track record when compared to Mr. Kane, and there are now questions here in Buffalo as to whether he's going to get himself back on track. But the character issue thing is obviously something that I'm not prepared to comment on, just because I'm not in the locker room, so I'm not capable of doing it. And as many Montreal fans might be doing it tonight, they're probably not qualified to do it either. No matter how many cousins, brothers, sisters they know who work for the team. It's always such a tough thing to say, like, well, we really needed to change the way our locker room was structured, so we're going to send away our best player, or maybe the second best player, if you want to put your price in conversation. That's a tough one for me, especially if you're if they're going to be choosing a coach over Subban, because we've seen how this plays out before with Patrick Waugh being traded away and the organization's taken by their coach. So hopefully the Predators aren't raising a cup while Montreal watches like what happened in 1996.
Yeah, that would that was the hot button hot take today was the Patrick Waugh situation from years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I agree with what you said though. You can't comment on what's going on because you don't know. We've heard a lot, but I mean, at this point, it's almost essentially like they smear the walls with crap while he leaves town, so it looks bad. But I mean, no matter what, at the end of the day, they traded away a fantastic hockey player, and if it blows up in their face, I mean, either way, either Mark Bergevin made the biggest trade of his career, or the worst trade of his career, or the last trade of his career, essentially. I mean, because if this doesn't work out, I mean, he's forever going to be the guy who traded PK Subban away, and that's
right.
Like you said, I like the way you put it. You made your bed, now you got to lay in it, essentially. So, one more thing before we move on, because I just saw some Twitter stats here. One thing before we move on to Steven Stamkos. Back to Taylor Hall really quick. We know the Devils play a very boring style of hockey. Usually, the joke is if you want to go to sleep, you turn on a Devils game, and that's true. A couple of those games have put me to sleep. Even when I'm at the arena in the press box, they've put me to sleep. But since 2012, 5-on-5, there are only 2 players in the National Hockey League who have a higher points per 60, like I said, 5-on-5 points per 60, than Taylor Hall. Sidney Crosby and Jamie Benn. So we're gonna find out. I mean, Taylor Hall, not even to mention the statistics that he's put up with a very poor Edmonton squad. But now he's talking about how he's got a chip on his shoulder and how he's going to prove Edmonton wrong, that they made a mistake. And I'm looking at the stats like, dude, you already kind of proved him wrong because you're really good, and they just kind of jumped on it, and you're going to go to New Jersey and you're going to be a gigantic star, even bigger than you were in Edmonton. I mean, even though hard to be a star in Edmonton because they're so bad, and But yeah, I think they've got. I think the Devils very smart to jump on that one. You can replace a defenseman. You don't get talent like Taylor Hall every day.
No, and you can certainly replace a defenseman who wasn't. I mean, and again, maybe Larson has really blossomed into the top 10 player that he was expected to be, top 10 pick. That brought with it, that the prestige that comes with being a top 10 pick. But, to compare it to the trade that followed it, they didn't even trade Shea Weber for Taylor Hall. You're not talking about a guy who truly impacts and changes the game when he's on the ice. And as much as Shea Weber has declined in recent years, or maybe even just this year, if depending on how you're looking at it. But, as many struggles as he may or may not have had, he is a difference maker when he's on the ice. There aren't too many defensemen out there who are going to go score 20 goals for you in a season. And all the while doing it while playing a very rough and tumble game like Shea Weber does. So, you're trading Adam Larson, who I might have some question marks around him, for a proven, legitimate goal scorer. That stat that you just used, obviously Sidney Crosby's a center. Jamie Benn is one of the few left wingers that I would personally rank ahead of Taylor Hall. Another one being Mr. Alexander Ovechkin. You may have heard of him too. But I'm going to start to struggle to find guys that I'm putting ahead of Hall after those two. Whereas I could fill a full roster of players before I'd find Adam Larson in terms of where I rank him as a defenseman. And that's just personal opinion. That's not even taking into account fancy stats and things like that, which are obviously becoming a bigger part of the conversation each day.
Now, when speaking of top flight talent, we want to move over now to Steven Stamkos really quick. Obviously, a little while after these 2 gigantic trades broke, Steven Stamkos bag that he's decided to re-sign an 8-year, $68 million contract with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Not necessarily making him a Lightning for the rest of his career, but likely locking him up in Tampa for the remainder of his National Hockey League career and then some. I'm not my first reaction was relief. And I say relief because obviously, as I mentioned, Chris, another cheap plug, the Instigator podcast, I was listening, and the one thing you repeatedly pointed out was it would be fantastic, absolutely fantastic to have Steven Stamkos on the Buffalo Sabres. But that cap hit that he brings with him, not so fantastic. And to think today, when I saw the news, the first relief was okay, so the Sabres aren't going to have a $12 million cap hit on on the team for the next 7 years. Fantastic. So there's a little wiggle room. And then the second was obviously he's not going to Toronto. Aside from that,
Yep.
I was not surprised. I was cool with it. I'm fine with it.
I am right there with you. I think the not Toronto portion of this will probably please me more and more as the summer continues into the regular season because, and I know there were a ton of Sabres fans who had married their hopes and dreams to Steven Stamkos wearing blue and gold. And I feel for those people because obviously they're going to be upset. They're probably not going to know what to make of it. They're going to be starting to think, okay, I know Kyle Post is out there, and then they're probably going to be asking who else. But I can't ever think, and I don't know if there's ever really been a case where you have such a dynamic star player, like a player like Steven Stamkos, 60 goal scorer. He hasn't scored under 30 ever. I think maybe the lockout season in 2012-13 he scored under 30, but obviously there's 40 games. And even then he may have had pretty solid numbers. I don't have them in front of me. But to have such a dynamic superstar talent like Stamkos, but to have so many question marks with the broken leg and how that may or may not have affected him in the last couple of years, the blood clot issue and whether or not that's going to linger. Because if it lingers, all of a sudden you're talking about having signed a player, it's just dead money then. And that's scary for his own personal health issues, of course, but also from a fan cap team perspective, obviously that's going to really hamstring you. So I can't really ever think of a player, who came with such quote unquote baggage, and it might not be fair to call it that. And then of course the cap hit. So I'm right there with you. I felt a little bit of relief. I was a little disappointed that the chance of getting him is gone. But he's not going to Toronto, and I think that's just dandy.
I like it too that he didn't drag it out. He knew from what I read on Twitter. He knew today. Called his agent and said, let's start negotiating with Tampa Bay. And I mean, for him it makes sense because he gets to stay in Tampa. It gives him likely at this point, at least for the next couple of years, the best chance to win the Stanley Cup. I know it all really depends on what Tampa decides to do, and I guess this is kind of like a open up a can of worms here. But whatever Tampa decides to do with Ben Bishop to further improve that team, that also may make them even stronger of a contender for the Stanley Cup. I mean, last year they were super close to the Cup without Stamkos and without Bishop. And I mean, they're almost reminding me of the Texas Rangers a couple years ago in baseball, where they were so close to actually winning everything and they just couldn't get there. And you never want to be there. You never want to be in that position. I mean, I'm not going to bring up the other team. I'm not talking about that. We're just that doesn't happen. That doesn't exist to me. But I think it's a smart move for Stamkos. It's obviously a no-brainer for Tampa Bay, but for Stamkos, he gets to stay in Tampa, like I said, with all the stuff he's got going on there, whatever it may be. But thankfully it's not Toronto. But now the Buffalo Sabres fans and the Buffalo Sabres have to turn their attention and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I would have to assume at this point it's Kyle Okposo, lock, stock, and barrel, and then everyone else.
Yeah, I would assume so. And we had Matt Collar on the podcast last night, and he mentioned how he could see Okposo probably wanting more of a win now than win tomorrow type situation, which he said like a team like Anaheim was one that he threw out there. Like that would be a good fit for him. I know for a fact that Okposo would fit like a glove in Los Angeles. They have some pretty tight cap issues, but just from a fit perspective, he would dominate. I think he'd be perfect on the wing with Kopitar or with any other one of those. They got some really, really good players out there. He'd be a great fit there. But yeah, from a serious perspective, I think Okposo is probably the new belle of the ball. The issue there is, are you going to have to go pay him $6.5 million to get him here? And if you're paying him $6.5 million, I mean, maybe I have a little bit more of an antiquated view of the salary cap. When I think $6.5 million, I want a 30 goal scorer. I think that Evander Kane could certainly score a few more goals for what he's being paid, for example. So, is it the best way to allocate the money? I mean, you can only ask that so many times before you have to actually sign somebody, because you can just ask yourself that all the way down the line before you spend $1 million on what he's tempting. So, and he's a fine player. But, yeah, as I talk myself in circles, Kyle Okposo definitely, he's got to be plan A right now. Maybe
Now,
Jimmy Vesey's plan A, but
I was going to say Vesey especially. I mean, I would probably have to put a little more emphasis on signing him. I mean, you can only do so much at this point because obviously the term is already figured out, the bonuses, whatever, they'll take care of that. But it just depends where he wants to be. But would you? I mean, we know restricted free agency kind of isn't really. It's something that GMs don't like to touch. But with Stamkos being locked up to a pretty hefty contract, we see a guy like Kucherov in Tampa, young winger, talented player. Would you expect Tim Murray to take a shot at a guy like that, knowing that Stamkos is locked up and they don't really have a lot of wiggle room there, or do you think he's just going to stick with trades and unrestricted free agency at this point?
The way I see the Tampa situation with Kucherov, and I think you kind of alluded to what the solution to that's going to be, and that's Ben Bishop. You move Ben Bishop, you free a little bit of cap space, which probably helps get Kucherov signed in particular. But a couple other, I know Meskov and Killorn are also do deals. Killorn's a nice little player. I think he's restricted as well, though. I don't believe he's unrestricted, but I think at least, and Tim Murray, and I'm not Tim Murray, so maybe he is looking at Kucherov saying, with just salivating, like, there's my offer sheet right there. I can really, put the bind on the Eiserman. But I have a different take on it, and this is more my take than what I think Tim Murray would do. But I would keep my attention affixed to the Anaheim Ducks. Hampus Lindholm needs a deal. He's young. He is a phenomenal talent. And I think you can absolutely justify giving him the compensation that would cost you a first, second, and third round pick. You could probably justify the 2 firsts, a second, and then a third. He's not worth 4. I don't think really anyone is. But you could really put Anaheim in a bind. And if Cam Fowler is really going to cost you as much as everyone's talking about, then offer sheet Hampus Lindholm. And if you get a Hampus Lindholm and they don't match it, I think that's a pretty big feather in your cap to try to convince Jimmy Vesey to sign. That's the offer sheet route I would go. That's just me personally. I would say I'd throw my quite a few eggs in the Lindholm basket and see if you can't get lucky. But I'd also still be working the phones hard to get Cam Fowler. And obviously, if you throw out an offer sheet, you can pretty much kiss that trade partner goodbye forever. So that's worth considering, of course. But
Absolutely.
But I love the idea of Hampus Lindholm. Obviously, that's a pipe dream, but Anaheim might still be my focus.
I'll tell you what, I'm just glad that that I got my article up on BLTDsports.com today before all this stuff broke, because I wrote this nice little chunk about Steven Stamkos possibly coming to Buffalo, and I you know what, it's dated, but I got it out before it happened, and I'm fine with that.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
I didn't mention that because you say pipe dreams, and the one pipe dream that I talked about very briefly, and it's going to be, it's someone, it won't be Buffalo. I just talked about Buffalo because, why not? It's nice, it's feel good. But a guy like Thomas Vanek is going to, I think, he was bought out because he can pick a spot where he wants to go, most likely for a contender. And I mean, I was baffled by just looking, and I understand. I remember, last season, ever since he went to Minnesota, Vanek has been very disappointing, inconsistent, but I mean, he still scores goals, just not at a clip like he once did. He's scoring about 10 less goals a season. He was down. I mean, he scored, I think it was 20 plus last year. The year before he had 18 or 19. But he's not scoring 28 a season like he used to. But he still may be able to go sign with a team like, as rumored, the New York Rangers and play in the third line. So there are guys out there. I'm kind of using this as a bridge to highlight. There are guys out there, not big name guys like Kyle Okposo, that the Buffalo Sabres may go after. I know in the Instigator podcast he did with Matt Collar, he points out Sean Matthias and Christopher Stieg. Those are two names where personally on the surface didn't think about it. Look into it more and you're like, yeah, that would make a lot of sense. I mean, the money adds up quickly, but then again, it doesn't hurt to have very talented players in the bottom six, something the Buffalo Sabres lack. So I wouldn't. My piece of advice, and I'll ask you, Chris, in just a second, but my piece of advice for Sabres fans is if the Sabres don't get Kyle Okposo or don't get a big, huge name on July 1 or July 2, it's not the end of the world. Give it time. Players are still going to move. Trades are still going to happen, hopefully, and things still have to happen. And Tim Murray knows at this point, and we've gathered it, that he wants to win, and he knows he needs to start winning. And I mean, I haven't really heard a lot of predictions for next season, but for me, I've pushed the prediction up to now. Get in the playoffs, be the 8th seed in the playoffs, and that's impressive. I mean, that's where I'm at. So for you, Chris, before we wrap this thing up, and I'll let you go after this, what would your kind of speech to Sabres fans, like, hey, if like I said, if they don't go big on July 1 or July 2, it's going to be okay. What would you have to say to Sabres fans heading into free agency?
I'd say trust the process.
Trust the process.
Yeah, because when this all went down, first thing I thought was like, this is because I'm a complete nut for trades. This stuff is just interests me beyond measure. One of my favorite things I read Moneyball. I'm not a huge baseball guy, but I remember reading Moneyball, and they're just, and the analytics side was cool, but the day-to-day operations of a sports organization really was what sucked me in. So when all this went down today, I just remember thinking, like, this is unbelievable to think of the trades that just occurred within a half an hour of each other. But after the dust started to settle, I was like, okay, where does this leave Tim Murray? Because you just traded Taylor Hall for Adam Larson, which is not even value. And if I'm Bob Murray or Doug Armstrong, I'm like, oh, well, Cam Fowler and Kevin Shattenkirk just got a hell of a lot more expensive. And then in turn, Montreal shook things up. They still got a good player, but they got a little bit weaker. Steven Stamkos is staying home with the runaway favorite for the Atlantic, of course. But now I'm thinking, like, okay, what are the Sabres going to do? The Kulikov trade was fine. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. But, you don't want to get left holding the bag. And I remember just in the little while after the trade happened, I was like starting to freak out. I was like, what are they going to do? They lost Stamkos. What if they lose Vesey? Postal might want to sign with a contender. They might not be able to get anybody because there are not many sexy names out there. Like you just went through it. Like there are some good value adds. There's Versteeg, Matthias, Darren Helm, Thomas Vanek on the right deal could be a decent little value addition for a team like the Rangers, like you said. But I started to think, like, all right, we need something good to happen for the Sabres. Need some good press. Tyler, my cohort on the podcast and with the blog, felt the same way. And then I kind of needed to stop myself. I'm like, okay, hold on. Like, we still have Jack Eichel, Ryan O'Reilly, and Sam Reinhart. If Evander Kane stays healthy, if he keeps his nose clean, probably literally and figuratively at this point, we're talking, a nice little core. So it's not as if all hope is lost in Buffalo. It's just easy to think that because the expected free agent signing of Steven Stamkos is out the window. They haven't gotten the sexy, puck-moving, top-pair defenseman you were hoping for. So, it's easy to get down and discouraged, but, Tim Murray's been known to pull a rabbit out of his hat, and I'm willing to wait and see what he has in store for us at the end of the week here. Hopefully he does pull the rabbit out of his hat, though. That would be that'd certainly be a nice way to wrap up the off season.
It would be very nice. I mean, we've known Tim Murray to as I like to point out, trust the process. That's my favorite. I absolutely love that. Every time he says it, I die. But we've learned to trust Tim Murray, because when we think he's going to zig, he zags. When you think you're going to go right, he goes left. Up or down, whatever you want to say. That's what he does. Nobody expected Dmitry Kulikov to be acquired from Mark Pysyk at the draft, but that's what he did, because he just felt that was the best value for whatever he wanted to do, and we continue to trust it. I mean, the team is getting better very quickly. They were handful of wins last season out of the playoffs, and nobody expected that from that franchise, from that group of guys. And you don't have to make wholesale changes, but you certainly need to add value in the right spots on defense in the bottom six. You need to get a top six winger at some point in time, whether it's Jimmy Vesey or Kalak Post or whoever it may be. You have to add more talent, add more goals, get better defensively, and obviously with goaltending, if you're gonna, I mean, you're hitching the wagon to Robin Leonard, but you need to have a guy who you can trust in case of emergency, in case you got to break the glass. But I mean, it would be nice to see, Tim Murray go out and get Cam Fowler, or go out and get Kalak Poso, or go out and get big names. But again, when the puck drops in October, it's, everything will be heading in the right direction. Tim Murray has proven time and time again he's not going to make a dumb move. He's not going to overreact and make a panic move. He's going to make, smart, calculated trades, signings, all that stuff to make sure they are not taking a step back at any point in time throughout the process. But one more thing I wanted to point out, because Bob McKenzie can never let us have any fun. He points out that we're starting to see now these deals and everything point towards the next potential lockout. He points out the NHL can file September 1st, 2019 to terminate the CBA. If the NHL doesn't, the PA can file on September 15th for 2020 termination. So, hey, guess what, everybody? Enjoy your hockey now, because it looks like we've got another labor disagreement coming up. And Bob McKenzie also points out he's anticipated to retire in September 2020. So if you want to be the hockey guy, the Bob McKenzie, there you go. You know when he's going to quit his job. But with that being said, we end on a depressing note, because if there's nothing that hockey does well, they do lockouts very well. They're very, very good at them.
Yeah, they need to break that. They need to break that.
They need to cut the crap. They need to cut the crap, because I don't want to miss any more hockey.
No kidding.
But I want to say, Chris, I know we spent a little longer than we expected, but I do appreciate all your time tonight, man. We got to get together sometime soon in Buffalo for some Lloyd Taco. We got to get the better live than two in a box dead cast. I had to remember the name. We got to get that happening with all four of us, me, you, Tyler, and Brayton. We'll get that all happen. We'll figure it out. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Again, you can follow Chris on Twitter at the number 2 ITB_Buffalo, 2inthebox.com. Check out the Instigator podcast. I am Ryan Wolfe at Wolfe BLTD on Twitter, at BLTD Sports on Twitter, Facebook.com/BLTD podcast. Keep an eye out, friends. There's so much going on in the hockey world, so much going on in the sports world, but right now, I still can't believe that Taylor Hall got traded for Adam Larson. So, with that, I bid you adieu. Thank you again, Chris, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. Appreciate it.
Everybody have a wonderful evening, and thanks again for tuning in.